Welcome to the Calm Cockpit, where pilots of all levels can find high-performance tools, actionable strategies, and access to professionals who can help you fly smarter and stress less.
Today we're joined by holistic psychiatrist Dr. Adrienne Adler-Neal for an in-depth discussion about real-life barriers that pilots face when it comes to emotional well-being. From regulatory fears to industry stigma, and why it's time to rewrite that script with openness and compassion.
You'll also learn about the power of neuroplasticity and how research has revealed how mindfulness can strengthen mental resilience, reduce stress, and elevate performance.
From practical tools like 4-7-8 breathing to insights on sleep, routines, and nutrition, this episode is packed with strategies to help you build that mental muscle.
The Calm Cockpit podcast starts now.
Onyx 12 Mike Oscar, runway 27, clear for takeoff.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. I'm Gita Brown, a midlife student pilot and licensed yoga and meditation educator with over 30 years of experience teaching high performers how to improve their lives without adding stress.
And I'm John Niehaus, professional pilot and flight instructor. Feels like this episode is one that we've been leading up to since the very beginning of this podcast. And we want to thank Greg Brown, flight instructor and former guest on this show, for introducing us to Dr. Adrienne.
Yes, thank you so much, Greg Brown. I cannot wait for people to hear this. And like we've done for all of our interviews, John and I are going to start with just a very light framework for the episode. Then you're going to hear the full interview with Dr. Adler-Neal and buckle up because it's a good one. Then at the end, John and I are going to give just a very short sum up, but really more of a call to action today about how you can take everything that you've learned today and start putting it into action.
So let's dive in. We have so much that we wanted to cover with Dr. Adler-Neal. And not only was she such a good guest, but you can't solve the world's problems in an hour interview. So the first half of this interview, I think, was really kind of an important way of setting the stage. We discussed with her sort of the environment of mental health in aviation, and frankly, she was a little bit surprised by the state of that. But we really wanted to talk to her about the stigma of pilots discussing their feelings and just mental health in general. And the crucial part of that is just coming to the understanding of how much your performance can be affected by a positive change in your mental health. The second half, it actually specifically addresses the resilience that your mind can have and how to enhance that in high stakes environment like what pilots operate in. So how do you do things, as I always love, tips and hacks? How do you do things to make yourself better so that you can perform better?
Yeah, and I could really think of no better person than Dr. Adrienne, as we are fondly calling her, to help us tackle these issues. Just listening to her, you could hear not only the depth of knowledge and the compassion that she has for other people, but the way that she is clearly doing this for herself and in her own life. So I really consider her to be sort of a role model for us in that. And yeah, to John's point, there were times where I thought either her jaw was going to drop or her head was going to explode or both, as we sort of were explaining to her what the general feeling is in the aviation community towards particularly receiving therapy. So those real-time reactions were really great to see. So her background, just so that you have that before we get into the interview, she has an undergrad degree from University of Pennsylvania and a master's of public health from the University of Memphis. And then where she really started to dial in, though, is where she completed a combined MD and PhD program at Wake Forest School of Medicine. So let me say that again. She completed a combined MD and PhD program at Wake Forest School of Medicine. No small feat to do either of those. She just did them both at the same time because why not? And she studied the neurobiology of mindfulness meditation, which I think is fantastic, giving that scientific underpinning for these very traditional practices. She also completed a psychiatric residency at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center, and now she lives in Arizona with her family. So she has an ongoing passion for exploring the world's major spiritual traditions as an avenue for her own self development. And she brings that to her practice for those patients that are interested. And as a holistic psychiatrist, this field is really sort of founded on the principles that we're not only looking at a discrete illness pathway. However, we're looking at the entirety of a patient's lives, in her words, encompassing everything from the thoughts, beliefs, relationships to the physical environment and diet as well. So she's really that kind of psychiatrist who can tailor each person's care to the unique circumstances. And she's all about empowering her patients to connect with their own intuition and, in her words, ultimately curate a life filled with joy and purpose, which I think you'll hear all of that come through brilliantly. That wonderful mix of compassion, humanistic connection, and then the scientific underpinning for really knowing which strategies are going to actually give you the result that you're looking for. So, dear listeners, as you go with us on this awesome journey of listening to her, I encourage you just to be curious and open and see what resonates for you, because she's going to share so much in this next hour and 15 minutes. It might be a bit overwhelming at times to know sort of where to go next. But as you're listening with those open ears, look for those moments that resonate the most strongly for you. And that might give you a little direction for your potential next steps. But without further ado, I think let's launch right into the interview with Dr. Adrienne Adler-Neal.
Dr. Adrienne, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. How are you?
Pretty good. Welcome to the Calm Cockpit. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here.
So we went through your lengthy bio in the introduction, and we're still kind of pinching ourselves that that you're willing to come onto the show, because you have such a great insight into sort of the brain and body from a real doctor and science standpoint. And aviation mental health has become just such a huge kind of buzzword over the years, and it's so needed. It's so needed. We're in an industry where typically we don't like to talk about our feelings. We don't like to talk about our brains. We really try to focus on the mission and completing that. And so much of that hinges on your pilot medical, but that's just, how does your body work? That's how's your heart doing? How is your cardiovascular system and your vision and all of these other things? But so rarely do we ever talk about how's your brain and how is it allowing for you to be kind of in that tip-top aviation shape.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my good friends is a pilot, and she and I were just comparing being a pilot to being like a surgeon and an anesthesiologist, because that's both of our husbands are anesthesiologists. And with my medical background, I was thinking about how most of the time, everything's fine. The patient or the plane is stable. But you have to always be prepared for the fact that every so often, you could be in a life and death situation and have to be operating at the very tip top of your capabilities. And that, to me, is a recipe for anxiety. Things are okay most of the time. It's kind of ER docs as well. Most of the time, everything's okay. But every once in a while, it's life or death, and you have to put your brain in that network and be able to go there immediately. And that is a recipe for anxiety.
Yeah, there's a interesting correlation on the idea of not being able to leave your problems at home if you have any. And it doesn't even have to be anything serious. It doesn't have to mean that somebody passed away or any life-changing moments, but sometimes it just might be you wake up and you don't quite feel yourself today, and you're staring down a 6-leg flight day, and there's thunderstorms and there's challenges, and you've got to be on your game. When you cross that 10,000 foot mark, it's still there. And somehow you've got to figure out a way to compartmentalize. And that's a healthy thing. It's not saying that life for the normal person should be completely without troubles, but it's how do you manage that to be, he said, peak performance.
Right. And how do you take control of your own mind? How do you know that you have skills and resources and mental muscles that you can bring online to use during that situation if you do have anything on your mind besides just taking care of your souls on your flight.
So you have all the answers to this then, right? That's what we're going to discover in this episode, is that all the answers will be solved.
I wish. I wish, but it's certainly a focus of my interest is how we do this.
Awesome. So one of the things that I wanted to start with, just so that people can kind of really understand what we're talking about here, you mentioned the idea in our sort of pre-show interview about kind of mental resilience and mental plasticity or neuroplasticity. Can you tell me what exactly is that, and how does it relate to just overall kind of brain performance?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love this question. So we tend to think, and it was an older idea, that our brains were just formed. Like at age 25, when your brain was developed, it was done. This is your brain. But we've really learned that neuroplasticity, which is defined as the capacity for our brain cells to change in response to behavior, that this is something that continues throughout life. So to kind of put that in other words, we have the capacity to change our brain through our behavior. And that happens throughout our whole lives. So a huge area of my interest is how do we do that to help enhance our own health, happiness, and productivity? Have you heard the phrase neurons that fire together, wire together?
I haven't, but it makes sense.
Oh, okay. So it's basically the idea that as you start to connect as different neurons in different brain regions are connected functionally in a network, so they're starting to kind of work together, then they actually form new physical neuronal connections as well. So the idea, for example, I'll kind of jump into mindfulness, since that sometimes I think it's helpful to have like a practical application to talk about. So when you're employing a mindfulness practice, so mindfulness, I always like to start with definitions because it's, people have their own conceptualization. So mindfulness is defined by John Kabat-Zinn, who's one of the American leaders of the mindfulness movement, as awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally, in the service of self-understanding and wisdom. So that can be employed through a meditation practice where you're sitting on a cushion, kind of that traditional image of that meditator where you're noticing arising thoughts and sensation, observing them non-judgmentally and letting them pass through. Or mindfulness can be as simple as when you're washing the dishes, you're washing the dishes. Your mind isn't somewhere else. It's actually on the feeling of the water on your hands, the feeling of the soap as you wipe your dish or whatever. Or mindful walking, noticing the feeling of your feet on the ground, like really being grounded and present wherever you are. So that practice completely rewires the brain. I think this is one of the most fascinating things. So mindfulness changes activity in brain regions associated with managing your emotions, growing new neurons, learning and memory, depression, stress, anxiety. So to be, really, really concrete about it, it actually increases the thickness in your brain in the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in helping with decision making and helping regulate your emotions. So mindfulness, the way I like to think of it, is it's building your brain muscle. So let's say in the physical world, let's say you wanted to lift some huge, big, heavy thing. And you said, well, in order to do that, I'm going to have to go to the gym and over exercise this same muscle so that I can get to the end result of lifting this big, heavy thing I'm interested in lifting. Mindfulness is the same thing. So every time we employ that mindful attention, be it during meditation or just throughout our daily lives, we're strengthening areas of our brain, like the prefrontal cortex, also the anterior cingulate cortex, that are involved in helping manage our emotions, helping regulate our emotions. So then the goal is that when you're in one of these stressful situations, so let's say you're flying during a day when you've got, maybe there's a divorce going on in the background, or you're in serious, marriage counseling, or what, your kid is sick or whatever it is, and you have to be at work, that muscle, the actual brain, prefrontal cortex or cingulate cortex, these areas that have to manage those emotions, have to be involved in attention, problem solving, self-regulation, managing fear and anxiety. They're strengthened because you've been going to the gym for them through your meditation and mindfulness practice. So, you've actually changed the brain, and in turn, there's another piece of this that I love. So mindfulness actually decreases the size and reactivity of the amygdala, which is our fear center in our brain. So that's the part of our brain that when we get overwhelmed with anxiety or fear, shoots up, lights up, and can kind of hijack our whole system, really take over our whole brain. But with mindfulness, that fear center becomes actually smaller and less reactive. And then these prefrontal regions are stronger, denser, thicker, and can actually help regulate that amygdala better. So when you really need it most, that muscle's there for you.
So this is kind of a win for everything that Geeta's been saying since we started, is
Yes.
that as woo-woo as people tend to think meditation and mindfulness might be, what you're saying is from a doctor standpoint, there's evidence based on science for this.
Very strong science. And that's one of my favorite things about mindfulness is that this, I think so when I started researching mindfulness, so I started in my PhD. So as I know you guys mentioned, I did that combined MD PhD program, and part of my PhD was studying mindfulness, the science of mindfulness, and how it helps regulate pain. So that's actually something we haven't gotten into. But it was a little woo-woo when I started mindfulness. I started researching it in 2015. Back then it was still, I don't know, this new age thing, this Eastern thing, this can't be science. But research was really starting to come out and has since come out showing this is the least woo-woo you can get. It's actually changing your brain, and we see it on neuroimaging. It's concrete, it's tangible, and it's real across so many different studies, so many people. I mean, anxiety, stress, depression, pain. It helps with the gamut.
I want to underscore one little thing you're talking about here, because I think it's a different way that I notice my students conceptualizing of how they can change themselves in their lives. And I want to summarize it to you and tell me if I'm getting this right. If I'm hearing you correctly, and based on my own experience too as a meditator, very often what we think is that we have to feel differently before we can act differently. Right? Like we wait until we feel motivated to work out. We wait until we feel good to have that hard conversation with a loved one. We kind of wait for the feeling to arise and then we act.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm hearing you say is if you do the actions of observing yourself with compassion, of observing the present moment with a non-judgmental awareness, a neutral awareness, that can then lead us to feel differently later. So like the action portion of it is key to that neuroplasticity. Am I summarizing that accurately?
Yes. And what I absolutely love that you're touching on, this is a fundamental aspect of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is one of the most prevalent psychotherapies. And it's called behavioral activation. So exactly, the idea is that people think I have to feel different to act differently. But what we really find is that you act differently and then feel differently. So in that traditional kind of behavioral activation approach, people will say it's the Nike slogan, "Just do it," is based off of behavioral activation from CBT. 100%. That's where they got that.
We're going to call it, though, your method is going to be just do it, mindfulness, period.
Right. But it's so true. And I mean, from your background with yoga, the idea for you would be, let's say you don't feel like going to yoga that day, just get yourself there. It will change the way that you feel. That's the whole point. I think there used to be an idea of our emotions are something I can't control. They just kind of come up. They're these things, they're these mystical things that come up and drive behavior. And what we're learning is that no, you really create your emotional state proactively, or you experience the effects of what you do reactively. Like, for example, alcohol changes the brain. So what it does is it increases an inhibitory neurotransmitter called GABA in the brain, which kind of makes you feel good, lowers stress, lowers anxiety. But your body, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. The next day, your body increases glutamate, which is the excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain that causes little anxiety, little stress, in the extreme, like in alcohol withdrawal, tremors and seizures and all of that. The idea there being that you are, without maybe meaning to, the activities you're doing there are actually worsening your emotional state.
So there is some philosophy in almost like, and this is very basic, but willing yourself to be happy, choosing to be happy even in a bad situation is actually a thing.
Yes, I think the danger and the thing we have to always pay attention very carefully to here is the idea though of blaming, of then if people thinking, so if I'm not happy, it's my fault, is kind of the inverse there, which is certainly not true, because I think, there's so many different layers here to mental health, and especially from the psychiatric clinical perspective, there are so many underlying genetic predispositions to things like clinical depression, clinical anxiety, bipolar schizophrenia. There's so many other things there at play. But if we're talking about someone who's generally healthy or can employ different mechanisms to boost their mental health, it's certainly possible to do that. But if there's severe underlying illness or significant underlying illness, medications help as well. So that's always my disclaimer with that, is that no one's at fault, but these are techniques we can use that people can start to learn about to boost mental resilience, happiness, lower stress, lower depression, all of that.
It's also a little bit of a I don't know, cliche or myth too, that like if you employ these techniques, if you are a meditator or you practice mindfulness, yoga, tai chi, or journaling, any of that, then, oh, you're that person who's like, everything is always awesome and wonderful, even when it's so clearly not. There's a disingenuous thing, because
Yes.
I maybe have heard that said about me. And to me, it's a little bit more, I feel personally, my own practices help me to remain more neutral in a helpful way. So I can see when I'm getting caught by fear, and I can see when I'm getting caught by anger. 90% of the time, I'm aware that I am not the anger and I am not the sadness, that it's just a temporary state. And I've noticed in general, to your key of resiliency, that I tend to move through those experiences, where sometimes my peers might get stuck in identifying with those experiences. And then they identify as just, oh, I'm that person who's like always a little pissed off. Whereas I might experience that, but I'm a little more able to sort of neutrally observe myself. It's neither good nor bad. It's just is what is happening, and can sort of move through that a little bit. So according to you, like my brain is like super buff.
Yes, your brain is very strong. Yeah, I think that's such an important point, is that we're not talking about whitewashing things, making them everything's sunny, everything's rainbows. Mindfulness is about observing the good and the bad and allowing them to pass through. It's about not resisting anything that comes into your plane of awareness. It's about really accepting, and like you said, Geeta, that word compassion, that I think is the best word. It's really bringing that compassionate, curious, open stance to whatever emotions, whatever is coming in. And I think a big misconception is that if I let it come in, if I don't fight it, it'll overwhelm me. But what we actually find in mindfulness is that emotional states are very brief. What makes them prolonged is if we attach to them and don't let them pass through. So like in meditation, the idea is that you're kind of observing thoughts or arising sensations, whatever it may be, as clouds passing through the sky. You just kind of notice them come in and let them pass naturally. The thing that we so often do with negative emotions or experiences is we grab that cloud out of the sky and we hold it, and then we think about it, ruminate, keep going. And that's what causes that emotional experience to extend.
Or we try to do the thing and push it down like the beach ball underwater, We just push it down and push it down and push it down. And eventually it pops right back up when you least want it. Like when you're in that emergency situation you mentioned earlier.
Yes. And this is something that I find just so valuable and important, and kind of brings me to why I think therapy is so important. What happens, like you're saying, that beach ball, like if we are avoiding or resisting parts of ourselves, negative emotions, like negative, traumas. We all have big T, little t traumas that have happened in life. If anytime our brain kind of comes near that, we, oh my gosh, no, and like shove it back into the dark, it gets bigger and starts driving our emotions and behavior from behind the scenes in ways that we're not aware of. So think of people having outbursts at, there's a tiny thing happening and all of a sudden they're freaking out. It's that big beach ball that they've shoved down that doesn't have a context or a place to attach to. So it just comes out on anything in a stressful moment. And that can be very dangerous for pilots, for somebody in that situation. And therapy, I think why people always think, well, I don't want to go there. I don't know what will happen if I go there. Well, what happens when you shine a light on the dark is it starts to integrate in a healthy way. We start to gain that mindfulness piece over parts of ourselves that are driving behaviors. And we start to actually bring the subconscious into the conscious. And then we start to really be able to deal with it and face it and choose actions as opposed to just react unknowingly to things that are coming in, and we don't know why we're reacting the way we are.
So I want to focus on this for just a second, because I think it's really, really important. And I know that part of the intent of this episode is to provide actionable steps for people who are just trying to cope with normal things, but also increase their performance while they're doing that. So we'll get to that part. But the idea of holding something in and the idea of, oh, well, I can handle this. It's, yeah, I've got something that I'm concerned about, but whatever, like that beach ball, I'm going to push it down. I can do it by myself. It's fine. Because traditionally, and I'm making a gross generalization here, but traditionally that's the kind of people that pilots have been. We're oorah, we're going to go do this thing. We're big, we're strong. We're going to go and complete the mission despite what's going on in the world, what's going on at home, what's going on in person. And the thing about it is that the FAA over the years, and things are starting to change, so I'll give them some credit, they've kind of just said, like, you're not allowed to be sad. You're not allowed to have emotions. If you come out and say that, hey, I've got a problem, well, okay, are you going to continue to be a pilot? Or should we be concerned? Should your medical be in jeopardy? And all of these things. Who can you talk to? How often? What does that mean? Will that go into a diagnosis of something? Will I need medication? And that has created a lot of fear within the pilot community of, well, I don't understand the rules. And by my account, I'm not allowed to really talk to anybody, so I'm on my own anyways. And how damaging that can be, not just from the idea that you're avoiding your problems, but now you're adding in this loneliness of I have to be by myself, and if I share any of these things, then I'm putting myself in jeopardy. I'm putting my livelihood in jeopardy, my family, all of these things. Like, from a clinical psychologist standpoint, like, what does that mean to you? Maybe not understanding the FAA's rules in general, because we won't get into that, but like, for somebody who's in that position, what does that look like as a patient that you've maybe seen before?
Ooh, I mean, I have so many emotions myself coming up as you're saying this. I mean, it's so, the word that keeps coming up to me is shame. There's, when people feel like they are experiencing something that they're not allowed to experience, that's going to create a feeling of, I'm bad, something's wrong with me, I need to hide this, bury it down deeper. And those layers of shame are so detrimental to mental health. So that's the first thing that came up for me, was the opposite of shame is shining a light and having openness and saying, like, let's have these discussions. We're humans. We have hard things we go through in life. We have emotions to them. We have reactions to them. We have time periods where we might meet the criteria for clinical depression, clinical anxiety. A lot of people do. A huge percentage of the population does. And to ignore it and to make it feel like you're alone if you're having that, or there's something wrong with you if you're having that, that's so shame-inducing, which then leads, usually shame is an intolerable emotion. So people try to numb that emotion with oftentimes unhealthy, drugs, alcohol, self-isolation, whatever it may be. So the first thing that's actually coming up for me is, I think this is going to worsen the problem if that's the approach. I don't know if that's a okay thing to say but that's the first thing from a psychiatric perspective. That's the antidote is shame is the idea of, you're not alone. Me too. I'm going through this too. Like, that community of people saying this is normal. And to me, from the psychiatric perspective, I mean, if you are, again, going back to what we were saying at the beginning of the episode, if you are handling the possibility of life and death situations as your job on a daily basis, that can be very anxiety producing as a normal function of that experience. So to normalize that for anybody listening who's been in that situation, that's normal if you're having anxiety or stress in response to that. And in our society, going to therapy is one of the ways that we handle that. We don't live in a society where thousands of years ago, there's shamans and there's people who are like there to kind of lead the community spiritually, emotionally, and that's normal. And we don't really have that. And that's kind of a role of therapists and mental health professionals in our society. And getting help, talking to someone, shining a light on those spaces within you that you feel like have been shamed or aren't heard by others is beautifully healthy. So I don't know if that's, please feel free to ask follow-up questions. That was just the first thing that came up when you said that.
I think that a lot of pilots tend to be concerned that the idea of having that excessive stress or feeling sad one day or reacting to something emotionally, if I go to see somebody, if I go to talk to somebody, they're going to tell me that I have, for lack of a more sensitive way to put it, like I have issues, which, I mean, we all kind of do,
Right.
but,
Right.
nobody wants to confirm that, if I go to this person, they're going to tell me I have some kind of, clinical mental problem. And what I have heard, both from you and other people that I've talked to, that not only is that normal, but there's a difference between having a short-term problem and something that is continuous, that is something that you have to live with on a daily basis. There's that difference between I'm reacting to a worldly issue and there's something internal.
Yeah. I think from the clinical side, a lot of times, like when somebody goes through an acutely stressful or an awful situation, they have something called adjustment disorder, which is basically the idea that in response to that stressor, they're having anxiety, depression, symptoms of anxiety, depression, or both. And that can be a very normal part of what individuals experience in life. I also want to destigmatize sometimes people have an underlying, let's say, major depressive disorder that is being exacerbated by stressors. I think the problem is that that's being stigmatized in the community when I see so often patients that are extremely successfully treated. Maybe they have an underlying generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder. They get on medications, they get in therapy, and they're doing very, very well. And that's not a limiting factor from being able to be a wonderful, productive member of society in whatever way you choose to be. So I think that's something like, yes, to answer your question, there certainly are differences between there's something situational going on and I'm having a hard time, and there's an underlying maybe mood or whatever kind of diagnosis, but that doesn't mean, even having an underlying diagnosis doesn't mean you can't perform.
I had a very challenging awakening to the pilot community when I did my first medical. So I have a third class medical because I'm just flying general aviation, kind of for fun. Maybe I'll become a flight instructor. We'll see. But even that one, they said, you have to disclose anything and everyone that you've seen in the past few years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then, so I do all of that. And then I dug a little deeper into the rules on, could I go talk to a counselor? Could I not? After my father passed last August, because to me, working as a board certified music therapist, we were expected to be in therapy. We were like, it's part of you being a clinician that even if everything's hunky dory, you need to be checking in with someone, right?
Yes.
So it was just like a normal, like that's what I would have done in the past. And I looked up the rule, and maybe I'm reading it incorrectly, but as I read it at the time, it said something like, well, of course you can go see somebody. You could go see Dr. Adrienne Adler-Neal. Of course you can. However, if it leads to a formal diagnosis, then there's this whole other stream of things that might happen. Then we might have questions for you. And I was like, well, of course I'm going to get a diagnosis because I'd want to use my insurance. And
right.
he or she's going to have to write a code down. Does that mean that I have a diagnosis? So I balked. I was like, well, I'm not going to go see anybody. So I have a spiritual community. Thank God I have spiritual mentors. I have people I can talk to. But it really, for the first time in my life, when I probably could have benefited from talking to a neutral third party, just, my first parent passed away, mentor, role model, dad was just like, we were very close. I did not go talk to a professional because I was concerned that it would hijack my student pilot career. I had other, venues to talk to folks, but I'm thinking, wow, if someone like me, who I have resources and I'm like down for this kind of stuff and believe in it, balked, I can't imagine what other people are avoiding. And that really breaks my heart. And when you said the word shame, I was like, I didn't necessarily feel shame, but I did feel concern because I love what I do so much now. And the thought that I could not do it anymore because I wanted just to chat with someone after the loss of a
Right.
loved one. Man, that's rough,
Oh,
And
right?
think about if that were what fed your family.
I can't.
Right.
I can't even. I mean, it's so, and I know I'm probably saying things that are just at odds with the
Yeah.
aviation rule book, but from a clinic, I mean, this is what I do for a living, and I just feel like that. I mean, I think it should be a requirement that people go talk to somebody if you're a pilot and you have lives in your hands every day. You should probably have a support system that includes, Gita, like you said, a neutral third party, because there's something so wonderful about actually having somebody neutral, not intimately involved in your life, to talk to. I mean, they can provide. I mean, in residency, we're encouraged to go to therapy. I went to therapy. There's not, I mean, wonderful. And I never worried about, are they going to say I have something? Or, I know it's a known part of, listen, like in psychiatry, we are charged with other people's mental health. So the best thing we can do is keep our own in tip-top shape. And I view the same about pilots. Like, if you are in charge of people's lives, the best thing you can do is destigmatize people getting help so that they can take as good of care. But I'm hopeful that at least for anybody listening, at least if they have had a little bit of that shame, even if it's micro, of like, oh gosh, I'm feeling kind of sad or low, maybe there's something wrong with me, because that's the message I get, is that, or even if it's a subversive, like a, under the table message I'm receiving about, like, oh gosh, what if there's something wrong with me because of that? I'm hopeful that the takeaway can be, there's nothing wrong with you. Like, we are humans. We have the whole gamut of emotional experiences, and opening up about that to others in whatever way is feasible is healthy and helpful. So if anybody just feels a little lightening from that, I hope that at least that's translated.
That's one of the big points to the podcast, right, John? Is we're like, we want to have the conversations and just talk about it instead of sort of either pretending it doesn't exist or
Yeah.
hoping it doesn't exist, just to say, like he said at the beginning, we're all human. We all go through
Yeah.
things and that
Yeah.
is normal. And that's why, like, for me, when my dad died, it would have been a normal thing in the past. Like, oh, let me look online and see who is out there who's working with grief, and I'll go see them and talk to them, even if I am
Yeah.
adjusting normally to that. Because to me,
Right.
that's a sign of someone who is self-actualizing and
Yes.
evolving, that they're willing to
Yes.
talk to someone, not that they are going to someone because there's something wrong with them. To tie
Yeah.
Exactly.
back to your point of neuroplasticity, when we engage in
Yeah.
different behaviors, we experience different emotional states. So when I go
Yes.
talk to professionals, I have like a personal coach now. I'm like, well, I guess that's who I'm going to, because they're not a therapist, so I can talk to them. But when I talk to her, I'm then changing how I feel later on down the road. Instead of feeling like, oh, there's something wrong with me, I need to be fixed. So I think
Yes.
there's some room there in the pilot community, at least maybe for ourselves, that we can shift that metric. Instead of saying I'm broken, I need to be fixed, saying I want to increase my resiliency so that I feel better. So I think this
Yes.
conversation with you is a big piece of hopefully moving that forward for people. And like you
Mhm.
said, people feel a little less alone, and just normalize
Mhm.
that we all have our stuff. Welcome
Yeah.
to the club of having stuff.
Of
Would you
being a
call it big
human.
T and little t, big trauma and little trauma? We all got it.
Yeah, we all got it. Like, yeah, and we all have those things that the way I like to think of it from a therapeutic standpoint is we all have those little, like, parts of us that have been injured in life at different times. We all have those little injuries that have maybe led to different coping mechanisms that aren't always healthy. And maybe it's as simple as like perfectionism, or being a little defensive at times because there was some injury down there that gets a little
Mhm.
activated. And what I love about therapy is, like, we all have that. Nobody doesn't have that. And therapy really goes in and helps shine the light on all those little dark spaces so that they come into our conscious awareness and we can just hold them all with compassion. Like that is the main way that I think of approaching both myself now and patients, is that we're trying to just bring that light of compassion to every part of ourselves, every emotion, every experience, so that it can come up and really be like integrated and healed. So that in our lives, let's say something gets triggered, we're able to kind of, that's that little pain from back then. That's okay. Let me just hold that with compassion. And all of these studies show, this is one of my favorite points. All of the studies show that the way we are kinder and more compassionate to others is being kinder and compassionate to ourselves. Even people, there have been studies so showing that people who don't believe this, it's still true. So, and I don't have the study in front of me. This wasn't one of the points I was thinking about making, but it just is coming up naturally, that we are actually objectively kinder and better to those in our lives if we are kinder and better to ourselves. And I think that's something that we can get anybody on board with. Anybody wants to be kinder to their spouse, to their children, to their friends. So start with yourself.
Which leads us right into where we wanted to be. So, we talked about the misconceptions. We talked about some of the problems, and, let's kind of breathe out the negative and breathe in the positive here.
Yes.
Let's talk about this increase in neuroplasticity. Let's talk about how can we, like you said, if I'm better to myself, I'm better to others. I might even be better at what I'm trying to focus on, what I'm trying to do. Mm-hmm. How do we get better through the increased neuroplasticity, the reduction of anxiety and stress, and use that as kind of our superpower to excel at whatever it is that we're trying to do?
Yes. Oh, I love this. This is my favorite thing to talk about. So I think there are so many avenues to do this. So we're talking about resilience and mental health. So we can tackle this really from a mind, body, spirit perspective. So the way I think about it is wherever but somebody wants to start is good. Wherever feels the most comfortable for them to start there. So starting with the physical side, because I think sometimes that's easiest for people to understand. So if we sleep enough, if we actually get 8 hours of restful sleep, our brain is more resilient. We have less stress. We have improved mood. I mean, that's just fundamental. If we're eating balanced meals 3 times a day, and what I mean by balanced, I really am talking about balancing your blood sugar. So what happens when we eat, sugary things or straight carbs is our blood sugar spikes and then it drops. And what that can cause, that can mimic anxiety and stress. So if you want to eat fat and protein at each little time you're eating. So think like avocados, nut butters, cheeses, things that balance your blood sugar. And what those do is those prevent those spikes and drops. And when you have that equal blood sugar, your mood's more stable. Your stress affects you differently. You're more resilient to little, stressors that come in. So if you're going on a flight, if you're a pilot, think about just adding in that meal with the fat and protein before you go on. It'll increase your resilience. It's really, as simple as that. Limiting caffeine, that's another big one. So that, and as I sit here with my cup of coffee,
we both just went like, no.
do what I say, not what I do. So it really, caffeine mimics anxiety. So I always ask patients, how much caffeine are you drinking? And sometimes it's so much. And I'm like, well, there's your anxiety. Let's make sure. And what it's doing is that it's causing your heart rate to go fast, which then from the physiological perspective tells your brain, I guess I'm anxious. When really it's just your heart rate's going fast. But your brain interprets that as, I think I'm probably anxious.
Interesting.
Yes, I love that one. So movement. So this is something that, yoga is an interest of mine. Geeta, I obviously know this is a passion of yours. So yoga, for instance, we actually, it incorporates all the things, mindfulness, exercise. So it's improving you physically, mentally. There's a study showing it might actually buffer against age-related cognitive decline. So it might actually help your brain stay younger and healthier if you do this frequently. So there's, all of these ways to help boost your brain health. Exercise improves neuroplasticity, learning and memory. something we think about with neuroplasticity that I didn't talk about before is this brain hormone called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So it is the hormone that causes new neurons to be created. So activities that increase that hormone are going to increase your ability for learning and memory and new neural connections. Exercise is certainly one of those. So you want to stay young, healthy, happier, exercise. And I'm throwing all of these out just because, it's always take what fits, leave what doesn't. So I'm kind of running the gamut here of whatever kind of hits somebody's, oh, I want to try that. Go for that and ignore the rest, if nothing else resonates. I also think something that I was actually just talking to a patient about this week is starting your mornings. So we have the most mental resilience and capacity in the mornings. And then our day kind of tends to take on the tone of our morning. So let's say you wake up, you're just kind of not feeling great, kind of scrolling social media. It becomes harder to change that momentum of your day. So focus on your mornings and creating some sort of power-packed practice in the mornings, because then that kind of puts your day on the right foot and makes it easier to make all the healthier decisions throughout the rest of the day. And what I mean by that, early morning sunlight helps regulate your circadian rhythm, helps you sleep better, helps your mood. So let's say for some people getting out, looking at the, sunrise in the morning is feasible for them. They're early risers or, they got to get up and go to work. Going out and doing that for a little bit, maybe pairing like a few yoga poses if they like yoga, or a smoothie that has, the nut butter and spinach or whatever it is, or a few just kind of mindful breathing moments looking at the sunrise. Maybe that is how they like to start their day. Or maybe somebody's really motivated. I'm going to go to the gym first thing in the morning. I mean, that's going to change the whole, feeling of your day, as opposed to if you just wake up and are scrolling Instagram or looking at the TV or something. So those are kind of the physical things I like to think about. And then kind of tying it back to the mindfulness. So if you're open to it, if you're interested in trying this, starting with a 5-minute meditation in the mornings, maybe you make your smoothie, you sit down somewhere, and mindfulness, I think, can be very opaque to people. It's like this black box. What are you talking about? And all it really is paying attention. So you anchor your attention somewhere on a physical sensation. People love to focus on the breath because that's something that's always available to you. It's always here in your moment to moment experience. And you just focus your attention either on like the tip of your nose or on the rise and fall of your chest or the rise and fall of your belly, wherever feels comfortable to you. And then you just anchor your awareness there. And then part of the process is distractions will come in. People will come to me and say, I'm not good at meditating. I have all these distractions. And I'll say, oh my gosh, great. You're doing it correctly. You noticed you had distractions. You're doing a great job. So the whole point is you have distracting thoughts and sensations and emotions and whatever it is that's coming up, pain in your knee. And as soon as you can, you just notice and label it. Let's say, I'm having pain in my knee. Breathe through that, try to let it pass, return your attention to focusing on your breath wherever it is, and wait for the next distraction to come up, which it will. And sometimes you might find, okay, for 5 minutes, I actually just went down a rabbit hole. I was just down the rabbit hole thinking about whatever, and I didn't return to my breath. Great. You noticed it when you stood up. Okay. The main thing I'm passionate about is bringing it back to that compassion. Like, this is not another excuse to blame yourself or be hard on yourself. It's everything is an opportunity for self-compassion. Just like, we can view others that way. Like we extend that compassion externally. And over time, so what you're doing when you sit down for those meditation sessions, you sit down, you look at the sunrise, I've got this beautiful pine tree out, but whatever it is that you're focusing on in the moment, that's building those brain regions that are involved in self-regulation, in lowering anxiety, improving mood. So it's going to the gym for your brain anytime you do that. It's banking things banking gym time so that when you need it potentially later, your brain is a little more resilient in the face of any stressors that come in. So that was a long-winded, lots of different ideas. What came up for you guys, or what questions? What else can I help with?
I have a little observation where you were talking about the meditation is decreasing the reactivity of the amygdala, which is going to, create that immediate fear response and is increasing your ability to just sort of handle a stressful moment. So one time I was in a big crowded cafeteria traveling, and I was with three other yogis. They happened to be my students, but they were already teachers at this point. So there's four of us at this table in a packed cafeteria. I forget where, it doesn't matter. And you guys have been in cafeterias, they're noisy and loud, right? And someone in the back room of the cafeteria dropped a metal tray that was full of other metal trays. And,
Oh
cafeterias,
my
it's all
gosh.
glass. It was loud. 95% of the people in the cafeteria jumped, that startled where it's like, phew! And the four of us, or three of us rather, we're sitting there. We all just looked at each other and went, oh, that was a loud noise. Not one of us startled. We were just sitting there. We're like, whoa, because people were kind of freaking out. It was really noisy. And in that moment, I was like, that's why we meditate, because we were aware of the
Yes.
noise, but we didn't have that immediate fear response. We were just like, oh, that was kind of loud. Cool. And we didn't do that. Look, see what it is. Because we were like, we knew it was not an issue for us. It had nothing to do with us. We just carried on eating. Whereas around us, it was a little bit of chaos. And in that moment, I was like, I think I'm going to keep meditating. That was a while ago, but it was proof to me of what you're saying. And I'm thinking, for me as a pilot, I came to flying because I had a fear of flying. So a lot of these techniques that you're talking about, I use to help me manage that fear response, and now love flying. So I am living proof that it works. But I'm curious what John has to say, because I don't even know. Have you meditated, John? I know you work out, but
Yeah.
what's this stuff land with you?
So it's funny. This conversation is kind of near and dear to me because, and I'll predicate this by saying one of the reasons why we started this podcast is so that we can share things that we otherwise might not. And in my case, when I was going through airline training, it was probably one of the most stressful times in my whole life, for a multitude of reasons, being away from family and the future effects of it not going well and all of that stuff. Well, it all went fine. And I got out of training, and it was just kind of that recovery of stressful. It was 2 months of being gone, basically. Then going into commuting to a different place, because I was commuting to Chicago, and then missing my first major holiday. I missed Christmas that year. I'd never missed it before. And originally it was like, oh, well, there's just another day. It'll be fine. We'll celebrate Christmas another time. And it was that progressive buildup. And then we finally celebrated Christmas, and I just was not myself. And again, it goes back to what my AME told me, and this is not about this specific thing, but he does a presentation on aviation mental health that is really good. And he was talking about sort of that, the normalcy of kind of that snapping moment, that point where you just get to that, like, I have too much, and it cannot be bottled up any longer. And, nothing bad happened. It wasn't that, I had a breakdown or anything per se, but it was that step back of, whoa, this isn't supposed to be this way. And, just that needing to address it. And part of what I ended up doing was that I did find a little bit of meditation. I found the mindfulness practice, and if anybody's ever heard me before, that's where I started using that Calm app, because they do sort of the mindfulness of the day. And it's like you said, it's kind of that 10-minute, just breathe, focus on yourself for a second, just check in, just because you have these feelings of anxiety or stress or whatever it might be. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong. It just means that it's there. And if you acknowledge it, sometimes it just starts to dissipate. And so, to answer your question, that was kind of the catalyst into me trying to figure out solutions, because I had nowhere else to turn. I couldn't hide it anymore. And it really did help. I mean, I think as I've kind of gotten things under control and my life has sort of become a little bit less stressful in general, just through career progression, it's maybe not something that I do as much as I used to. I probably should, but it certainly, not only did it help, but it's stories like that has led to us having this conversation now, because those are things that you just don't hear from people, that you think that they've got their stuff together. You see them with their shiny shoes and their nice, pilot hat on, and you just kind of go, well, this person knows what they're doing. They have the life everybody wants, and I'm sure there's never anything bad that happens to them. Which just isn't true.
It's comparing their outsides to your insides. I think that's it's like assuming that they feel on the inside the way they look on the outside. And that's just
right.
so often not true.
But there is such an image. Sorry, go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, it's that analogy with the duck that everybody talks about. The duck looks calm, cool, and collected on the surface, and you don't see their little feet just paddling away.
Yeah.
But for me, from the outside, though, like coming to aviation at midlife, I had that image of pilots of they have everything together. They have, climbed the career ladder. Most of them have families. They're an extremely high paying job. I mean, try being like a freelance musician, freelance yoga music teacher. Hello. I was looking at them like, wow, they have everything all together. And then I come to this fear of flying in midlife. I never thought that being a pilot was something that, quote, someone like me could ever do because of this image. And part of what I hear and have heard John talk about since starting the podcast is that that's a little bit of a facade and a little bit of an image, and it's not the true experience. It wasn't until I heard a professional pilot, Captain Ron, who runs, I think it's called Fearless Flyers. He runs a fear of flying, sort of community and forum. And he wanted to be a pilot when he was a kid. He wanted to fly for the Air Force. And he went on his first flight when he was like 16 or 17. And it scared the bejesus out of him. And he thought, I can't be a pilot. My dreams aren't going to come true. All of this dreaming I've done, I'm scared. And he said, luckily, the person who took him on that flight saw that he was scared, and so sort of dialed back what he was doing and talked it through him, and gradual desensitization got him through it. But for me, it wasn't until I heard Captain Ron say, oh yeah, I was terrified the first time I went up in a flight. I was like, oh. And then I heard aerobatic pilots saying, oh yeah, I used to always get motion sick when I did the spins and the tumbles and the flat inverted spins. And I thought like, oh, I get motion sick, and so do they. Maybe I could do it. So I love hearing everything you're talking about here, because I think it's making that authentic connection to other people rather than a connection through a facade or a persona of professionalism, which is masking the truth. Because once I heard people saying, and John gave me encouragement too, because I think I talked to you right after I soloed, like, you can be someone who does this stuff too. It's not just for other people. And now I see that my fear of flying is like one of my greatest strengths, because I've actually faced it and talked to it and worked with it, where I know a lot of student pilots quit after they solo because then they become very, very afraid up there in the airplane by themselves. And that's where we lose a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to hear you speak a little bit, Adrienne, to that point of making these authentic connections with people, especially thinking of professional pilots like your friend who flies for one of the majors, and you're rotating through different people on the flight deck all the time.
Yeah. We were just talking about that.
Yeah. Are there ways that we can work on that authentic connection piece, not in a like, let's hold hands and sing Kumbaya, but in a real way that improves and sort of uplifts us all, rather than feeling like we all have to pretend like we have it together, when that's just not a realistic metric.
Oh, I love this. And it's so hard because, and I wouldn't know this if I hadn't met with her a couple nights ago. It was just chit-chatting, but she was talking about how, you switch partners all the time. Like, she originally was working somewhere where it was one partner for like years or something. I don't remember. I'm just not in this world enough. But since flying kind of commercial, it's, she talks about how it's always somebody different, and you never like, there's a different dynamic in the cockpit all the time, and you never really know what the dynamic is going to be, or how they are feeling, or how you're feeling, or and sensing kind of anxiety. I think she had a situation where she sensed some anxiety from the other person, and it was, how do we navigate this? And I think it's so difficult because, especially in a culture that doesn't encourage open conversation, it could be viewed as a weakness, which is, I think,
It is.
yes, yeah, like a cultural shift that would be a productive conversation of, you know, when you're working together with a partner, open communication, closed loop communication about feelings too, or about emotional experiences, I think can only enhance safety. So I'm thinking from my perspective of, being in medical school and, we did all of our rotations and being like in surgery. For some reason, that's like the thing that relates the most to being a pilot to me. And the dynamic in the operating room has to be very cohesive. People have to be on the same page. They have to be able to vocalize, feel safe enough to vocalize, like, I don't feel comfortable with what's happening right here. Hey, I think his blood pressure's dropping. Hey, I think, there's anesthesia, there's techs, there's nurses, there's the surgeons, there's medical students, and a lot of work is done on the culture in the operating room so that if you see something, say something, is people feel actually comfortable doing that. And I don't know if that I have the best answer here, but I think feeling safe emotionally and feeling like you can vocalize, hey, I'm having some stuff going on at home right now. I'm working really hard to be present and to be fully here. But if you see, but just know that. And so if you see something that seems not right, please bring it to my attention. Or, it just seems like having some sort of culture there would improve safety, like being open. Because I imagine if I'm sitting in a cockpit with somebody else and we're flying an airplane and I don't know them and they're not sharing anything, but they seem like they're maybe having a bad day, like that's going to increase my anxiety, which is then going to inhibit my ability to perform, because then the way I think of it from a neuroscience perspective is my mind is going to be in this anxious loop where executive functioning and decision making is inhibited. So like having that authentic connection and being able to really like, hey, yeah, I'm having a little bit of a bad day. It's not about you. It's not about the plane. I'm here though. Like, so, I mean, even just little things like that, I would imagine I would feel like, oh, okay, we faced the elephant in the room. Now we can all go, we can feel a little bit more comfortable. And I think there's such a line between like oversharing when you've just met somebody. So you don't want to, spew, or because that's not safe either for either of you. But also putting on a facade when there's something going on the surface isn't safe either. So there has to be some sort of middle ground there, I guess, is my long-winded way of saying that, working through that on my own.
John, what did you see with that as a CFI too?
Well, so I will say that a good crew is supposed to have a brief, generally part of the takeoff brief, where you're going to talk about internal and external threats. And so not to say that always happens, but that is supposed to be something that has been integrated into kind of your crew brief, which is like, look, I didn't sleep well last night. I'm really tired. Like you said, if you see something, say something. Like, you're not going to hurt my feelings. You're not going to call me dumb. But if I don't hit this switch at the right time, we're both in trouble. So I'd rather you say something than protect my feelings and have us both get, violated for some reason. And so, those things do happen, but I think you're absolutely right. There is that fine line between like, okay, is this person going to think that I'm not capable?
Right.
Or am I going to say too much? Like, where's that fine line between, doing something for the sake of a positive performance and doing something because I have to tell somebody and you happen to be a captive audience because you can't leave.
Right. That's also not like I understand the idea of you need your pilots to be sturdy individuals, like that's
Yeah.
when you're in that role, you are partly playing a role of sturdiness that inspires confidence, and you have to do that, but there seems like you were saying, there's a line there of also like, hey guys, I am a little off today, got some stuff going on. Feel free to call me out on any, there's a way to have an open line of communication in a way that maintains that kind of sturdiness, I guess.
100%. And to answer your question as the CFI, like it's almost easier because of course, yes, you are spending a lot of time with this person. So it's a one-on-one connection. You start to be able to observe what's normal and when they're off. I mean,
Right.
there have been times as a CFI where I've had a student walk up and I knew that there was some things they were dealing with. You know, maybe it's finals week or something like that. They're stressed out. And part of my technique was you just kind of have that initial discussion before you even walk out to the airplane. You just, hey, how's it going? How you doing? And it sounds so superficial, but what I'm really doing in the background is just gauging where their head's at.
Right.
And it's not about punishing them. It's not about saying you're not ready or you can't do it or any of those kinds of things. It's a, hey, you know what? You didn't sleep great last night and these flights are kind of expensive. And, you know, we have this ground lesson that we really need to work on. And so maybe let's just go spend, 45 minutes talking about this. And if we still have time afterwards, we can talk about a flight, but let's talk about these things. And every so often you get somebody who's a little bit disappointed. That's just because flying's fun.
Yeah.
But it's funny to be able to see the relief. And I've been in that boat too from a student side, but to see the relief on their face when they're like, oh, thank God. Like I knew this was going to go poorly and I just don't need another reason to feel bad. So like, yeah, let's go have this talk.
Yeah.
So a good CFI is going to sit there and pay attention and have the conversation and be able to kind of just in the background analyze what's going on with this person, because out of any pilot position, CFIs wear so many hats. This is what we used to say at NAFI all the time. I mean, you're not just a flight instructor. In a way, you're a coach. You're a life mentor. You're a psychologist. You're this, you're that, and you're gauging all of these things for this person because you're trying to make sure that you're encapsulating their success in your hands. And if they fail, it's sometimes because you didn't, make sure you molded it correctly. And so, yeah, it's super important.
I think that's something that any general aviation pilot listening to, take everything John just said about what a CFI does and understand that that's what you have to do for yourself once you get your certificate, because you're no longer going to have that CFI before every flight assessing you. And to just run through, Adrienne, we have a checklist called I'm Safe. Illness. Have you been ill? Are you on medication? Did you get sleep? And they kind of tend to run through that really, really quickly, but like really develop a robust system that you can self-assess, because if it's just you going up or you're taking your family up for that flight, you may not have, an Embraer or, Boeing 777 full of passengers behind you, but it's you and your family and the people on the ground. And no one wants to have anything other than a joyful and successful and competent flight. So for us general aviation pilots, really having a robust system where you can self-check all of the stuff we're talking about today as part of your standard operating procedure is great. And then having friends and mentors that you can call before flights just to do that check-in and have some way to self-correct before things get a little too out of hand. Because most of the flights we take in general aviation, we don't have to do any of them. In fact, none of them, including our check ride. Like you can always just say, not today. But we get into that mode of, even in general aviation, we have to do it. The check ride is coming. I want to do it. We get mission driven as well, even though we don't have a packed schedule and it's not our career. We're subject to that same mindset of kind of overlooking our weaknesses. So just be a John Niehaus to yourself. Have a little John Niehaus bobblehead doll and look at it and be like, how you doing today? How you feeling? And check yourself before you go out flying.
I love this because this is where the mindfulness piece so wonderfully connects back in, because when people don't have that skill, a lot of people don't actually have that skill to know how they're feeling. I mean, it sounds wild, but especially older generations who were kind of raised with you guys are talking about, you can't have feelings. So they don't actually know. So that, I think it's so, even using that language of checking in to see how you're feeling is newer, is harder for people. And what mindfulness cultivates is you actually start to be able to recognize arising emotional, physical sensations and name them, which is a skill in itself, so that before your flight, you actually can notice, like, I'm stressed, I'm anxious, and that's okay. Because I think a lot of times, especially in those older generations, it was felt that having those emotions wasn't okay. So they're so suppressed down that they can't even name them when they arise because there's that fear they're going to overtake them. So it starts to bringing that mindful compassion awareness to your inner life starts to really breed self-knowledge and an ability to check in, see what your limitations are for the day, and still hold yourself in compassion and be okay in the midst of that. I think that's the superpower of these things we've been talking about.
Are there places people can go to learn this kind of stuff? Do you think a live teacher is best, or do you recommend books or videos? Like, how would someone
Ooh.
who's kind of brand new to this, they want to dip their little pinky toe in, what would you suggest?
So many things. Look at my bookshelf. So
Just read all of those books and you will be enlightened and fine. There you go.
Well, sometimes with patients, I'll be like, let me grab this. Yeah, this is what this book is. And I'll show it. So there's a few, thinking back to where I started really like 15 years ago on this journey. So anything by Jon Kabat-Zinn, Jon, and then it's hyphenated Kabat hyphen Zinn.
We'll link all of these in the show notes, folks.
Yes. Okay. So one of my favorite books of his that I have read 1.5 million times, Wherever You Go, There You Are. And my favorite thing about this phrase is, that's the title of the book, but my husband always interpreted it as that mindfulness of wherever you go, be there, be present. And I always interpreted it as, well, wherever you go, there you are. So you better work out your stuff because it's going to be there. There's no outrunning it. So it's just a beautiful, beautiful book. But also anything by Jack Kornfield. He is an American. He studied overseas to become like a Buddhist monk and then came back and has really just done beautiful work in the United States. A Path with Heart is probably one of my favorite books of his. I'm trying to think from the science perspective. Richie Davidson is a mindfulness researcher for been going at it for decades and would actually study monks and put them in scanners and look at their brains. And so there's a fun for people who really want that just from the science perspective. Jon Kabat-Zinn has also done a ton of science of research. Like he formed mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is an 8-week mindfulness class, basically. But the neuroimaging component, Richie Davidson has really done a large amount of work on. If those are kind of the books. If you're interested, I mean, there's a million. There's a book called Radical Acceptance that is very beautiful. Tara Brock, I believe, she's a PhD, but also has a lot of Buddhist training. And that book, core concepts are really, and what I love, really accepting your moment-to-moment emotional experience in the service of fostering that self-compassion, because, the irony is when we accept things, that's when they really can transform. When we resist them, they really kind of drive our lives from behind the scenes. So beautiful book. And then I think for people who just want an app, like you were saying, the Calm app, listening to guided meditations, I really like Insight Timer as well. That's a good app. There's lots of different guided meditations, guided yoga practices, I believe. Calm, of course. Headspace is a good one. And then there's an app called Mindfulness. So I think those are all. And then, of course, like finding those local yoga studios. This can be just like wonderful, wonderful resources. Yeah. Do you need me to repeat? I know I went kind of fast there. Do you have any questions on those things that I mentioned, or?
I got them.
Okay.
They may be things that are on my shelf as well. So that
I bet. I'm trying to think if I've got some good ones over here. Those are kind of the main. Oh, random book though, by a scientist about stress. It's called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers.
Oh,
And
yes.
It's Robert Sapolsky. Just a wonderful, I read this, before I went to med school, back in probably 2010, I read that. And it just really prompted, I think that was the book that initially prompted me to really start thinking about stress and thinking about the biology of it and getting into the mindfulness. And he is a wonderful scientist who's written just a beautiful book. So yeah, always recommend that one.
So you've given us a lot to think about. You've given us a lot of the kind of actionable steps, whether it be the diet suggestions, the caffeine, which I don't know if I can do that, the positive self-talk and awareness, exercise, and building connections, and just sort of understanding what's going on in you can just be kind of helpful. I'd be remiss, and this wouldn't be a Calm Cockpit episode, if I didn't ask for a quick fix. Now, Doc, I know that there's got to be a ton of quick fixes in mental health. I'm sure it's very, very easy to just make all of this stuff go away. But when we talk about stress or even maybe slight fear, let's talk about a pilot who's sitting in the cockpit and they're going into Aspen, one of the more difficult airports in the country to go to. It's in the mountains. It's one way in, one way out. The winds can get gnarly. And I mean, literally you're coming in, watching the mountains go up. Oof. And it's challenging, and there's special training for it. And, it certainly, there is a fun feeling when you do get down and you're like, man, I just wrestled this bear all the way to the ground. But for somebody who's going into a place like that, especially on a bad weather day, and you're sitting at 40,000 feet, just fixated on it, like, oh my gosh, I got to do this, and the time's ticking. In a half hour, in 25 minutes, in 20 minutes, I'm going to be doing this very difficult approach. Do you have any techniques for in the moment, like compartmentalizing that or pushing through it, or what can you do to kind of help bring some of that natural anxiety down? Is there any tips?
Yeah. So yes, so the way I think of anxiety, it's top down and bottom up. And what I mean by that is your thoughts, your emotions can cause anxiety that then increases your heart rate. But also we can use physiological quick fixes to calm our body, which then tells our brain, oh, I guess I'm not as anxious. I guess I'm calmer. And so you can use physiological little quick fixes to bring your body more into a parasympathetic state. I think you guys might have touched on this in maybe a prior episode with breathing techniques, but the goal is that when you're anxious, when you're in that state, your body's in a sympathetically driven. So your heart rate's faster. It's the side of your nervous system that's like running from the bear, and your brain doesn't work as well in that. So what you want to do is you want to bring your body into a parasympathetic state by helping calm your physical body, which will then tell your brain we're calmer. So there's something 4-7-8 breathing. Have you guys heard of that?
I'm sure Geeta has.
Yeah, I see the nod from Geeta, yeah. So basically what it's doing is it's going to make your exhale longer than your inhale, which is then going to lower your heart rate, bring that parasympathetic nervous system online, calm you down physically so that your brain can actually function better. So what it is you inhale for a slow count of 4, you hold at the top for a count of 7, and then you exhale for a count of 8. So inhale for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8. That brings you into that parasympathetic, that calms you, that grounds you, so that your brain can really go online and think and be a little bit calmer. The other thing I would say, I like to, I think we talked about this before, I like to pair practices. I like to make them a little power packed. So if you're already doing that, sometimes there's different visualizations you can do that can help people feel empowered. So you can envision like a white light of strength around you where all the negativity is out, all the positivity is in. So you can, while you're breathing, you can envision like all of those fear-based thoughts, all of those what ifs, catastrophizing, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to do this. It's so scary. But you can envision all of that outside the bubble. Inside the bubble is you can, different affirmations, which sound woo-woo, but they're actually pretty science-backed, like I am capable, I am prepared, like I am, whatever it is that maybe you have something that you can say to yourself that makes you feel like I am a capable pilot, even if it's just I'm a capable pilot, like I've got this, while you're doing that breathing, whatever affirmation. I also always envision putting my energy like on my heart space, like grounding, because that makes me feel grounded and out of my thinking brain. So I'll kind of bring my attention into my heart space, say those affirmations, like really try to embody them, like feel them in my body, and lower my heart rate with that 4-7-8 breathing. Quick fix, but it can be, especially, I mean, you need a quick fix. Like there's nothing wrong with it when you're in those environments. You can't like, oh, let me go have an hour-long therapy session. No, I mean, you need something to like help you in that moment.
I love it. It's like training yourself to be in the zone. And I'm seeing, like you were
Yeah,
saying, if you do something in the morning, whether you're an early riser or not, whenever you arise in whatever time zone you find yourself in, you wake up, you do one of your power pack practices, looking at the sun, doing maybe this breathing practice so that it's something you're really familiar with and you've grounded it at a time when you're not stressed out. And then when
yeah,
you go to use it in a moment when there's high demand workload, you're also triggering then that memory of
yeah,
stability and security. And then I've got this. I may have done that once or twice in my flights.
yeah.
This type
Oh,
of thing.
you're
It
just,
really does work. It
it
really
really
does work.
works.
It
So you're
really works.
reminding me, my husband, so my husband is an anesthesiologist and he's like the man you want in a crisis. Like this is, he's like got it. I've learned it. I've tried to learn things through these techniques and he was like, kind of born this way. And he told me that something he learned from one of his mentors who was a neurosurgeon in med school is that so he'll often be on call, like 24-hour calls. He's in the hospital, like watching TV. It's 3 a.m. He's sleeping, but you get a call and he has to run down and save a life within, or do an emergent, anesthesia for an emergency C-section, or like, I mean, very extreme. So
Wow.
he's cultivated this little tiny practice that gets his mind being like, okay, we're flipped on now, because he's done it so
Yes.
many times in those situations. What he does, this is the same thing his mentor did. He'll put in a piece of gum while he'll put on a piece of gum, put on his mask. That serves two purposes because he's been like sleeping, helps his breath, helps wake him up because there's not time for coffee. Like does the same thing with his stuff. Put this here, put this here, put this, goes to the emergency, throws out the gum right before he gets there. And then that tiny little practice that's put into his routine has trained his mind to be in this certain neural network of, we're in crisis mode, we're here to save a life. So I think like even incorporating that somehow, like you're saying, into the mornings of like, yeah, I'm in some random time zone, I'm in some random hotel, but what can I incorporate that can cue my brain into like, we're in go time right now. We're in a different type of space now. Anything else is left. Maybe it's a certain song you listen to on your way to go that every time. Like when I was studying for some of our like boarding or certification exams in medicine, my husband gave me this idea and I listened to the same song every morning, like would getting my headphones in, drinking my coffee at my computer before my day of studying to cue myself it's time to get into this certain brain space. And now I've listened to the song a couple times and I'm like ready to go. I am ready to work. Whatever it is when that song comes on. So yeah, I love this so much. And shout out to my husband for, this being his thing. But that's a super good idea to get people. I need to be in an empowered state. Maybe I'm having something really stressful go on at home. Maybe I'm, but when I listen to this song or I do this meditation, I listen to this certain guided meditation, I say these affirmations, whatever it is, now those things are in a different space and I'm present for this job. Yeah, I love that. I'm glad we went down this rabbit hole.
Yeah, I like that too, and it's funny because it's similar to kind of what I do in the morning when I have to fly. I will try to make all of my decisions the night before so that
Mm,
my uniform's all ready to go. Everything is in a nice little pile. I don't have to search for anything. I mean, I even go to a point where like I'm a cereal guy, so I'll have my little bowl and my spoon already on the counter and everything's there. I don't have to search for it. It's just boom, 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 repetitive step. It's always the same. And, next thing I know, I'm ready to go and in the game.
yeah.
So it's nice to know that I'm not the only one that kind of does something similar.
Yes. I think it's important. It's twofold. It's like we have to take care of our stuff outside of those moments. That's where the therapy and everything we're talking about is so important. But when you're in the moment, you need a way, we're never finished products. We always have stuff that's being worked through. We're never like totally clear of everything. So in the moment, you need something to be able to put that aside and be present and be that sturdy captain that you've got to be, you know?
Or never finished products. I like that. I like
Thank
that.
God for that.
Hey, that's why we're here.
Phew. It's the university, right? The universe is a
Of
university.
life.
So I as much as I'd love to tackle all the world's problems in this interview, you know, I'm sure that there's enough to fill multiple episodes. But as we start to kind of wind this down, I mean, are there any kind of final thoughts or any additional words of inspiration for the pilots who are, you know, either just managing daily life or maybe even for some of those few ones that might be struggling with something in the background?
Let me kind of trying to think. You know, I think it's really that message of just normalizing the human experience that I think I've maybe bordered on harping on, but just really normalizing that, like, it doesn't matter what you do for a job or a living, we're all humans and we all have the breadth of the human experience and emotions, and really just normalizing that, like lowering the fear of facing those emotions so that people feel empowered to share, even if it's not clinically, even if it's not with a psychiatrist or psychologist, even if it's just with a friend, you know, feeling like I can actually have open conversations where I allow my humanity to be seen, because there's nothing healing like being seen by another human being who can look at you and say, me too. You know, there's just nothing like that. So yeah, just empowering people to really embrace that and not view it as being something wrong with them.
That's good advice.
Beautiful.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today, Dr. Adrienne. And I hope that maybe this might be the first of many, maybe, if we can twist your arm. But
I would love it anytime, please.
your advice has been insightful in so many ways. And I really think that the pilot community is going to appreciate everything that that you put into this episode. And certainly we do. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome back, listeners. It's just John and I in the room now, and I really hope you enjoyed that interview as much as we both enjoyed learning from her and getting all of her in-time real reactions, and then also the innate wisdom that she has from her body of practice, both with herself and then with her patients as well. As you heard, the conversation kind of naturally flowed into two parts, and just briefly want to highlight a bit from each, and then maybe give you kind of a little call to action and a way to sort of put it into action in your own life. So the first half, we really got into addressing the stigma about pilots seeking mental health support, particularly the T word, therapy. And it was really great to hear her in-time reactions and really hearing her talking about destigmatize this, because I know that's something John and I have talked about a lot. Let's have the conversations, because that can be a first step towards change. Then the second half was really all about these actionable steps for enhanced resilience. So with the actionable steps for enhanced resilience, there was so much that she gave. I'm going to put everything in the show notes, everything that she talked about with the morning routines, her book suggestions, her ideas on balanced meals, her ideas with sleep. I've done like a detailed enhanced notes for you in the show notes today. I would encourage you to go look at that and maybe pull from one of those areas that she gave, both in mind, body, and spirit, something that resonated with you, either that you're doing well and that you want to do even better at, or if there's an area that you're like, I don't do currently anything in that area, and I'd like to maybe start bolstering that up a little bit. Just pick one small thing from that amazing list she gave, or one book to read, and start doing something small today. Because what I really got from her is that this idea of resilience is a muscle, and you have to build it slowly over time, just like your biceps. And so if you start doing small little things today, imagine then if life calls on you in the cockpit or out of the cockpit with something big that happens, your resiliency muscle will be really strong and primed and ready to go. Most people wait to do something until like the horse is already out of the barn. But wouldn't it be amazing if, because you heard Dr. Adrienne Adler-Neal, you started doing something small, and over time you kind of started to have a more resilient brain? Imagine how you could respond to the next major life event that happened. Maybe it'll be a little different for you.
Yeah, and I think that it was really interesting to see how other professions have embraced it already. So often we talk about pilots and doctors having a similar career progression, similar stress level, and need for top performance. And realizing that on their side of the fence, they use it as a strength and we use it as a weakness. And seeing how we can do better as a profession is really interesting. And just how, again, her reactions to like, I'm sorry, you guys don't do this. Yes, we are criticizing a little bit in terms of where we are and how we got here. But we're also trying to make sure that we are focusing on the positive in how things are, working their way to getting better. And some of that is a call for pilots to kind of put their money where their mouths are. If you have the opportunity to take these actionable steps, it's time to do it.
That really tugs and resonates with me, John, because I think back when we started talking about having this podcast, that was one of the main things that I was sort of always banging on about, as my British friends say, which is like, have the conversations, number one, and then also do something about it. Like, stop waiting for another time or the right time, or waiting until the cancer diagnosis or the heart attack happens or you lose a spouse. Like, we're all grown-ups. We know that these things are going to happen. And that's what Dr. Adrienne talked about frequently. We all have big traumas and little traumas. No one is going to escape that. The question is, are you prepared to handle it? And as pilots, if we're looking at our training that we do is so comprehensive with a skill set, why wouldn't we use that same amount of training to get to know ourselves? To me, it's imperative, and that shows a high sign of intelligence and diligence that we're willing to look at this stuff. And I really want to hone in on that. If the only thing that comes out of this is one tiny little piece of destigmatizing that we have problems, then that's a good thing, right? Because I think there is that in that high performance culture, it sort of is like, hide your flaws, hide the things that make you human, because those make you weak. And I think the time has come for that to actually flip and say, no, because I'm aware of my flaws, because I'm aware of my trauma, because I'm aware that I have, insecurity about X, Y, and Z, that is actually a strength and a superpower. And if we can be one little piece of that, moving that conversation forward, my heart will be so happy and full of joy.
I couldn't agree more. And what was really nice was just it's one thing to, we say this all the time, it's one thing to talk about it, it's another thing to actually have the tools that you need to be a little bit better. And I think that that Dr. Adrienne did a great job in summarizing some of those things for us.
Did she ever? I mean, I was like dancing in my chair for so much of it. So along those lines, pilots, we'd love to hear your ideas, experiences, what resonated with you in this episode. Maybe you're not comfortable talking out in the world publicly about it, or even with a friend. Drop us an email, calmcockpit@gmail.com. Let us know what resonated with you, or maybe some action you're going to take. And especially if you have future questions for Dr. Adrienne Adler-Neal, because she has expressed interest in coming back, and we have so much that we can talk to her about. If there's other things that you want her to cover or get into or dive a little more into, please let us know. Drop us that email at calmcockpit@gmail.com. We would be happy to structure future episodes based on your feedback. So please don't be shy. Drop us a little message and let us know what is in your mind and heart about this, because we are all the ones who change the system by being different within ourselves.
Certainly, if they do help you, maybe consider sharing the podcast. Share it with your friends. Share it with your pilot cohorts. And the more you share, the more of these things we can do, and the more we can get just this extra bit of help out into the world and make pilots in general better.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And another thing that drives that is that shameless plug of, hey, leave us that 5-star review. You know, it seems like such a silly thing to click 5 stars on a podcast, but it helps that algorithm, and that might help send a pilot in the future when they're having a low moment and they're looking for something. Maybe we pop up a little higher in their feed because you left that 5-star review. It is part of being a community, and we would really appreciate that support. If you find this at all useful, subscribe, follow us on Facebook, and we would love to hear from you always.
And with that, fly smarter
and stress less.
Airbus Tower 1 departure is Airbus 321. Traffic holding crossing runway 33 left, 3 clear.